Hello there, and welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room for another project. And this is another of the projects that I made recently, and in this case, rather quickly, for the Halloween lookbook last month for the Baton Rouge. I wore this with my striped chartreuse and black wrap back top, which I also made here on the channel. I can put a card up to the video for this shirt here if you would like to make the full set. I never made a full-length mermaid-shaped skirt like this before, but I knew it was quite a simple modification from the basic pencil skirt into a gored version with flares below the knee. So let's jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom, and I'll show you how I put this one together. And we have the heater on as well. How lovely. Anyhow, I'm going to grab a lot of alphanumeric paper here because this is going to be a full-length, if not longer, indeed quite a bit longer, skirt today, so I'm going to need quite a lot of paper. But I will start with my basic pencil skirt front for my basic block set. I'll show you how to make this pencil skirt pattern in this video up in a card here. If you do not have your pencil skirt or basic block skirt finished yet, that is what I'm going to begin with for this buddy. I'm going to draw in my darts as well, because I will keep one of the darts and turn it into a style line on this, and I'll be eliminating the other dart by taking the measurement of that second dart that's closer to the side seam and splitting that dart fullness along the side of this other dart here. So my second dart there is 1 inch, so I'm going to add a 1/2 inch to either side of this first dart and then ignore the original side dart there as well. Hopefully that makes any sense. If you've seen me do any gored skirts or like princess themed skirts here on the channel before, you've seen me make that modification before. Basically, just instead of having 2 darts that are each 1 inch, I'm going to have 1 dart that is 2 inches of fullness. Now I'm measuring down the side here with my 18-inch ruler. You'll see me, struggle with the fact that this ruler is short for doing long things. Normally it's not a problem, of course, but normally I'm not making full-length skirts. But I've gone ahead and held a measuring tape up to my body to see from like my waist how far down my knee is. It's about 24 inches. What I'm going to do here is just mark on my pattern where that 24 inches down is, so I know where my knee is, and I'm going to flare out about 45 degrees from there, and then just draw a curve to smooth between that angle and the body of the skirt here. You'll notice I did not narrow anything first, so my pencil skirt pattern here is a straight sided skirt, so it doesn't narrow at the knee at all. It's not like a tapered pencil skirt. You could taper this a little bit before you flare out as well if you wanted to. Just depends on exactly what silhouette you are going for. This front will still be cut out on the fold here, although this will be in 3 pieces eventually here, because the center front will be cut on the fold, but these side fronts, of course, will be separate. Let me cut this out, cut the excess off the center front here. You could also add more flare down the center front if you would like to, and keep a seam here if you want. I'll show you that on the back in a way. But I'm going to cut out with that new dart fullness incorporated into this first dart all along between the front and the side front here. And I'm just going to cut that dart away because that dart fullness will now be created, or that shape will now be created just within this style line when it gets sewn back together. But of course, now that I've added a style line, I need to add seam allowance to that. So I'm going to go ahead and add back seam allowance on here so that I can sew these pieces together eventually, just before I forget. But I will add a little bit of flare in between these 2 pieces as well. So let me grab some spare paper and again tape that on from the knee down basically, so I can add on another bit of flare here. You don't have to flare every section or every gore. I will just go ahead and trace this same amount of flare that I added onto the side seam to add in between these 2 pieces here as well. So I want to have quite a full bottom of the skirt, like the bottom of the skirt where it pools onto the ground. I wanted it to be very Morticia and like have a very Addams Family vibe and really pool on the ground around me. So the hem of this is going to be quite circular after I add in all these gored sections basically. But you could add as little flare as you would like to have something that is a more narrow mermaid skirt. And I just measured down again using that 8-inch ruler so you can see me marking it every 10 inches or whatever to get an idea of how long I needed to make this. Luckily I ended up making this one the correct length. Again, just holding a measuring tape up to my waist and seeing where it started to pool on the floor, adding a couple inches to that as wiggle room, and that's just what I went with. And then here between the side front where that's going to stitch on, again I still need to add seam allowance down this style line, but also I'm going to add a bit of flare here. I added a tiny bit less flare to this right here between the side front and the front because I wanted the seam to fold in on itself, if that makes any sense. Basically just in this one particular section I added only about, 25 to 30 degrees of flare as opposed to the 45 I was adding everywhere else. And again, I am just eyeballing those angles. It's not like I measured it. We all know I never break out the protractor, as I always say. I am going to make similar modifications here to the back, although I will just keep the dart in the side back chilling here instead of moving it into one dart. In the back, there's more of a differential between my waist and my bum, as opposed to in the front, it's just the curve of the front of the body. But back here, I need my darts more, I guess. I need 2 darts more than I do in the front, so I'm keeping one of the darts. It'll just be in the side front section. But here I'm lining up my side seam from the front piece, so I can just trace on the same exact curve again to the side seam, because this is where it will need to sew together. So really that seam needs to match up perfectly. This is going to be the side back. This is going to be the center back. The center back here, instead of cutting on the fold, I will add more flare to, but I'm going to do that last. So start cutting things out for now. There we go. And again, I will cut along the center back, because I was thinking, don't want to cut this on the fold. Later I changed my mind, but I will cut my side back and back apart as well. I will eliminate this dart that's along the gore, of course. I'm just going to keep the other one that is in the side back piece here. So this dart, boop, goes away, because of course I just don't need it if I'm going to add a style line here. But if I'm going to add a style line, once again, I'm going to add seam allowance. You all heard my position on this last time. It's basically whether you were trained to use seam allowance on your patterns or not, then you're going to want to do it or not. I'm trained, or at least I was trained in school, to put seam allowance on my patterns, so that's just how I function, and would be difficult to change now. But here for the side back, I'm adding plenty of flare here, from about, again, a little higher than the knee down this time. I just started the flare a little bit higher in the back, just because instead of having a back slit or anything, this just allows a little bit more ease of movement, although when you see me in the end trying to walk in this skirt, it's not the easiest. That's mostly because I'm wearing heels that are a little bit too short for the skirt, again, so just it pulls a ton at my feet for the Halloween spooky vibes. But if I, again, were to wear this out, or even to wear this around the house, I would wear taller heels with it. And you can see I'm just measuring down and to get my hem to be the same length as the side. In fact, I'm dipping this down further. So I'm making this about, I think it's 52 inches long right here, but eventually I will make it even longer here in the back, just because I wanted the back to trail behind me the most, have a little bit of a train, of course, for the full drama effect. But now we have this, again, probably 45, maybe a little over degree angle on that side back. And I will need my center back piece here, which is very slim and small at this point. We will go ahead and start flaring that as well. And I will, again, need seam allowance where that style line goes back together. So I'm putting that on here first. Before I can forget, put my 1/2 inch of seam allowance on there, like so. And again, add some more paper. Very good for using up scraps, this. Although it does take a lot of paper. And it is almost the season to get good, cheap pattern drafting paper. And by that I mean in January, when all the wrapping paper goes on sale, you can find a lot of cheap wrapping paper that works very well for pattern drafting if you don't buy alphanumeric paper by the roll like I do. Of course, I do a ton of pattern drafting, so I just buy this paper by the roll from a company called Atlas Levy. The shipping on that roll of paper is quite expensive. The paper itself isn't too bad for hundreds of yards of paper, but because it weighs a lot, shipping is quite expensive. But I just consider it a business expense, of course, because this is what I do for a living, for my job these days, is demonstrate pattern drafting. So pattern drafting paper is one of the, major things I need in my studio. Once again, I need to make this long. I've added that 45 degree angle between the center back and side back where it will need to be. And then I'm measuring the length of this. I'm going to make the very center back of this a good 15 inches longer than, my height would require, basically. So I'll dip this down even more in a minute here. But for now, I'm just adding the flare between the center back and side back. This is, again, just a really simple process. You can flare it as much as you want. You can keep it quite straight if you want. This is just how you make a gored skirt. And this particular one happens to be quite mermaidy and quite flared from the knee down. But again, I didn't bother to narrow this one at all at the knee. You can narrow it a good 2 or 3 inches at the knee first if you want to. Just come in towards the knee from like your widest part of your hip. Come in a couple inches of the side seam and then back out. If you want to narrow it there first. But here I'm adding on more paper so that I can flare the center back itself as well. That's right, just grabbing every scrap of paper, as we can see here, and taping it on. And our heater has turned off. Lovely. Once again, headphone people know what I'm talking about. Everyone else probably cannot tell. But I know, and there's that. So just taping this on. Again, I'm going to start this flare a little bit higher up here in the back, as opposed to right down at the knee. This is probably a couple inches higher than my knee, or like the back of my knee, whatever that part of the body is called. I do not know what the opposite of knee is, sadly enough. I never took anatomy. I mean, I would probably be terrible at it. It seems like a lot of memorization, not really my strong suit. But I'm adding my seam allowance along the center back since I am going to be using a seam there, as well as flaring it. And again, dipping this hem down. You can see I'm just really dipping it down, not measuring it particularly a ton, as we are used to seeing me with, because we all know I'm not hyper precise. I kind of just eyeball it and hope for the best. It usually works for me. That red robe came out a little bit short, so it does burn me occasionally. But this is a good 60-inch length down here at the center back of this skirt. But these are my panels now. I have the center back, the side back. I'm going to go ahead and walk my seams just to make sure that everything is still lining up. So this is my side back and back. I'm just going to line that up to make sure that this is the correct length, that those pieces match up. They do, so that's good. Now, again, I traced the side seam for the side back here from the side front, so it should, again, be fine if I were to walk that seam. Let's just double check. Just go ahead and line that up, make sure everything's still working. Yep. Just because it's so easy for me to mismeasure with this 18-inch ruler, because I'm not thinking in terms of 18, I'm thinking in terms of 20 or like by 10 inches. So it's really easy for me to mess up the hems on these. So I do, see for this, I forgot to trim it. I do try and keep things in order. And this is 45 inches, so that from my waist to the floor is around probably 43 or 44. And this front piece is at 45 and the back dips down again to about 60 inches. It's going to depend on your height. It's going to depend on the type of heels you want to wear, how much, how dramatic you want to make the pooling on the floor, which I did quite a lot of for this particular skirt because it was for a Halloween video, yeah? But I then cut out all my panels out of black cotton sateen. I'm going to start by sewing the center backs together. I did go ahead and run all of these through the serger at one point or another. So you'll see sometimes things are already serged, or sometimes I will remember to take a shot of me serging them. We'll see how it goes here. I was sewing this in one evening. So I made this skirt in about, from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. I made the pattern and I made everything because I decided I needed this black skirt for that video and I didn't exactly have time to do it, but I made it happen anyhow because I will sacrifice sleep anytime for clothing, sadly enough, or for the vision for a video I have in mind. But here I am sewing that center back seam together. I am going to have a side zipper in this one instead of a center back zipper. I do like to do that when I make skirts. Sometimes I'll put them in the side. I never do a side zipper on a dress. That I find irritating, but in a skirt, it's no problem, and I will show you that later. And I will sew the darts in the side back pieces that I left there as well. Of course, just starting at the large end of the dart, sewing down off the point and then tying those threads shut. This again is just how I was taught when I went to fashion school as a freshman, and I've stuck with it ever since. A lot of things you have to understand that some of the reasons I do things is because that's how it's not because necessarily it must be like the best method, because every school I went to, which I've been to 4 different fashion school programs, everyone had their own, this is the only way you should do it method. So, But it's just because when I was a freshman learning sewing, I already knew how to sew, but like learning sewing in class, I was, marked down and graded poorly if I didn't do it the way they told me to. So some of my things are just ingrained deeply because I was being graded on them at one time or another. But here I am running the side seam panels. I can't remember if this is the front or the back, through the serger. It doesn't matter. As long as you keep your panels together. You might want to write with chalk on them if you are easily confused, because of course they're going to look quite similar. But I was luckily keeping things in check this day. Go ahead and press my center back open, including up here where it is straighter. You might have to clip the curves where the flare begins below the knee. Sometimes the curve is shallow enough that it doesn't really require a clip. And sadly, this fabric was quite wrinkled because I made the mistake of pre-washing this fabric, which is a good thing, but then not pulling it out of the dryer immediately. And so it got really set in its wrinkles, which is really unfortunate. And sadly enough for me, I pre-washed some fabric yesterday and completely forgot. And once again, it is now up there sitting in the dryer where it has been all day. Once again, probably super wrinkled. I'm going to go ahead and just turn the dryer back on and hope for the best that some of those wrinkles come out. We'll see how it goes. But here I am sewing one of the side backs on to the center back panel now that the center back is all finished and pressed. And again, you can see both edges of this are serged. Everything is serged now, so I can go ahead and do all these long seams. Again, it's not difficult. It's just a little bit time consuming because the pieces are big. But these seams are not hard to do. This is not a difficult project by any means. I would say this is a pretty good beginner project as long as, you can make things long enough. Just remember to walk those seams on your pattern first, and then you won't run into any surprises when it comes to sewing it, which is always a bummer. But I will go ahead and do the other side back onto the center back here, and then it will all be, the back will be constructed basically. And then I will do the same for the front, constructing the entire front first. That way I can keep things straight when it comes to doing the side seams, because I want to have my left-hand side seam open at the top to put my zipper in. So I'm just going to do those side seams last and put the other gores together first. All right, so here's my right hand side seam. I can go ahead and do this. Again, it's very repetitive, this. Just sewing these long gores together, you know, now that I made them. Again, this is a very easy project. So I hope some of you will give it a try. Anyone else out there who needs a dramatic skirt to prance clumsily along in? Go ahead and give this a press. Again, I'm going to clip that curve below my knee just a bit here so that everything flows nicely. You could, of course, line a skirt like this if you wanted to, or do a different seam finish if you are so inclined. Because I have the serger, I usually just use that to finish my raw edges. Although if I have a really nice fabric, I will sometimes use rayon seam binding. It's my other preferred method of doing things. But here on the left-hand side seam, you can see I've left this top, 9 inches open because I'll put this zipper in there. But from there down, I will go ahead and sew the rest of the seam shut so I can press this open and otherwise be ready for my zipper to go in. So yes, I pressed the seam allowance for the rest of the seam open and press the top of this open. It's 1/2 inch on either side. I will then go ahead and turn this right side out and pin my zipper in with the right hand side of this right next to the zipper teeth. This will be the under side of my lapped zipper. I always do a lapped zipper. Just what I prefer. Some people prefer a centered or railroad zipper or an invisible zipper. I tend to find that invisible zippers break on me more often than a regular zipper does. So I find regular zippers more reliable. And the last thing I ever want to do is have to unpick a broken zipper and put in a new one because I hate mending. So for me, I find regular zippers just more reliable, and that's why you always see me using them and see me doing a lapped zipper. But here I have the zipper foot on my machine, and I'm struggling to get the zipper tab out of the way here so that I can stitch down the rest of this. The zipper tab was getting stuck. Stop it. There we go. But I'm just stitching this right down the edge, right down next to the zipper teeth. And then I have the other folded pressed edge here ready to lap or overlap over the rest here. So I'm just pinning that so that this is overlapping my zipper and the other opposite edge here. Again, you can see how bent and sad these pins currently are. I do have a new box that I need to break into because I do sew over them. And I know so many of you find that very disturbing, but I've never had any adverse problems from it, and old machines actually react better to sewing over pins compared to new ones. This doesn't throw off the singer's timing or anything like that. This is a cast iron buddy. The machine will break me before I break the machine, I feel. But over here back on the 99K, I'm just going to go ahead and sew down the lapped side of my zipper now. Like so. So my zipper is in here on the left-hand side seam of my skirt. And then all I have to do for this buddy at this point is to construct a waistband. I didn't make a pattern for my waistband. I never do. I just cut a straight strip that is around 32, 33 inches long. My waist is usually around 30 to 31 inches, depending on the time of the month, time of the year. Things fluctuate. I am a human being. But I'm just going to go ahead and put this strip along. I do cut these along the straight grain so that they do not stretch my waistbands, but I cut them so that they're about 3 inches wide so that they will finish around 1 inch. This waistband itself, that's just what I prefer. You can have a wider or a thinner waistband if you want, or you could just throw a facing or again a lining up here as a way to finish the waistline as well. It's all up to you. That's the nice thing about making your own clothes, is you can make them exactly how you would prefer. And I quite like a waistband. It really, again, defines and cinches that waist, which we all know. I'm an hourglassy person who prefers these things. But now that I have that sewn on, the first edge sewn on, right sides together, I can fold all this down to be clean on the inside, like so. Iron everything into place so that this folded edge on the inside covers my stitching line from before. And you can either stitch from the outside, stitch in the ditch, or do a little bit of top stitching. Especially something like this, I wouldn't mind doing top stitching on it. It's going to get lost in the black anyway. But I did just hand stitch this down along the inside, slip stitching it down here inside. And I'm going to leave a little bit of extra tab here at the end. That's why I cut my waistbands a little bit longer than my actual waist measurement. So I'm going to have a little bit of a tab here to put a skirt hook on that later. And then my last step for the skirt, see, I promised it was easy, is just to hem it. And I'm going to use some wide double fold bias tape, again made out of polyester shantung that I had sitting here in the studio that I was using for other projects. So I might as well just cut a little bit extra. And when I say a little bit, I mean quite a lot, because again, this skirt is probably, I don't know, maybe 3 yards at least around the circle of the hem. It's a very wide circle. It's probably wider than a circle skirt would be, the hem on this buddy. So I needed quite a lot of bias tape, but you saw me hem with this last time in the red robe video, and I'm doing it the same way here. And here is my finished, long, trained, formal black sateen, cotton sateen skirt. Of course, out of a silk satin, this would be even more delicious, or perhaps even silk taffeta maybe in the future sometime, and especially out of a velvet. But as much as I want a velvet version of this, I don't really want to torture myself by having to sew with velvet, so we'll see if it ever happens. This is still a bit cumbersome to walk about and out and about, but I do think it would be a nice like hostess skirt for if I was hosting dinner parties or book club meetings, etc. at my house in the future. So when I have a house to haunt, I think this will be a perfect hostess skirt for those sort of occasions. But I hope you enjoyed this video today, and thank you as always for watching. I'll be back here with more sewing, vintage fashion, costuming, and crafting real soon, so I'll see you then. Bye!